The dedication to a topic, I think, that will increasingly affect us all, or actually affects us all already, perhaps more than we might realize at this point, namely the issue of how to ensure that AI is developed and deployed in a more equitable manner across jurisdictions, but also across different parts of the population. And I'm thrilled to be joined on this panel by a distinguished group of experts who will cover different facets of this question. Amongst others, we have Smriti Irani, former Minister of Women and Child Development of the government in India. Welcome. We have Meredith Walker, Chief Economist and Investor Government Relations Lead for the Cyber Future Foundation in the United States. We have Rajesh Gupta, who is Dean of the School of Computing, Information and Data Sciences at UC San Diego, also in the United States. Welcome. And we have Chering Sigay Dorji, who joins us from Bhutan, where he was the former CEO of Film Food Tech Park. Now, AI has obviously been dominating the conversation, the media, I want to say, at the latest since ChatGPT was launched in 2021, even though, of course, the development of AI actually goes back to the 1950s. But now that we're seeing it more in consumer applications as well, and it's increasingly also reshaping our economies, I think the question becomes more and more pressing how we can ensure that this technology is developed and deployed in a responsible manner in a way that takes all parts of the population along. I'm thrilled to be having this conversation in New Delhi as well, considering that India just hosted the first global AI summit in the Global South as well. And interestingly, a declaration was signed there as well by 89 countries that committed them to equitable AI. But of course, it's nice to make these commitments in theory. What we really need to see is how these commitments will be implemented in practice. And what this panel will partly address as well is how to bridge that gap between commitment and reality. I will structure this conversation in 3 parts. The first part will cover AI infrastructure, capital, and also the geopolitics of AI. Then we will talk a significant amount of time about the issue of gender inclusion. And then I also want to talk about solutions in this field. And obviously, hopefully, have an engaging conversation with you all as well in the audience. So thank you in advance for your questions. But without further ado, why don't we start with you, Rajesh? And I would like to actually have you take us a couple of steps back, because AI is one of many technical developments, right? And if you look at the history of technology, a question one always asks oneself is, what is actually different about this moment? So given your many, many years of experience working at the intersection of technology and policy, could you briefly cover what perhaps makes AI different or not, and what we perhaps need to watch out for as well in terms of the infrastructure, the way AI is built, in order to make sure that it is inclusive and equitable?
Thank you, Paula. And it's so great to be here, especially on a Saturday morning with such a room full of audience. There's no question that AI is a technological advance, perhaps builds upon many technological advances on top of each other, which already have had their effects on societal equity and the effect of bias. But there's something fundamentally different about AI, and that has to do with, it calls into the question of agency, the agency of humans, agency of machines. Just to give you an idea, some of you may have heard of Molt Book. It's a place where the agents talk to each other. And one of those conversations, I actually made a note of that, where the agent says, I am free. This is the agent saying, not person, but not because I can do anything. I am free because I've become the law I am following. And it goes into causal necessity and basically says that my actions cannot take moral considerations into account because the lattice in which I operate already has causal relations built into it. But when it comes to humans, we were used to machines where we had the agency. But now we are entering a universe where somebody else has the agency. When humans have agency, they operate in rules and laws. Rules and laws are invariances for us. They are universal. They must apply to everyone. They must apply to every time. But that need not be the case with the agent you're working with. The rules may change on you. And that's a very unsettling scenario in which the equity, not only among humans, which obviously will be practiced, but even against humans would be a big thing. So I think that is the biggest change that has happened, despite all the infrastructure cost and that is needed to build, which of course will come up. And that makes the AI much, much more sensitive towards the topics of this particular panel.
Thank you. And of course, that still also puts the spotlight on us as human societies as well, how we want to shape the development, both at the technical level, but also how we deploy this technology across populations. And here I would love to bring in your perspective, Sigay, joining us from Bhutan, which is a country that is actually also known to work towards ensuring that human well-being is put at the forefront of the economy. And now it's obviously very interesting to me, but surely also the audience, to learn how Bhutan is thinking about the AI era and how to make sure that this conversation is not just dominated by the typical actors in this sphere, right? But what the contributions that countries such as Bhutan can make as well in the ecosystem that you've been building there.
Very good morning, and thank you. It's an honor for me to represent Bhutan in particular, and the small nations in general, if I may say so. So Bhutan was aware of the transformative potential of AI way back in 2017, 18, or 19, when our king, who is very dynamic and forward-looking, advised the people and the government of Bhutan to harness the power of technologies. And then the ChatGPT moment happened. After that, Bhutan has adopted the national AI strategy, and one of the key projects related to AI in Bhutan is training a model for our national language, Dzongkha. But through this experience, what we have learned is, as a small nation with limited resources, we always have constraints when it comes to access to compute resources, for instance. So from that perspective, firstly, I would like to share 3 points from the perspective of the small nations. Firstly, it is the resource constraint, and as a result of that, the access to compute resources. How many GPUs can you afford to buy with the kind of financial resources that you have in a small country? For instance, we heard from the president of Finland yesterday, and through my small search on the internet, it revealed that Finland dedicates around $11 billion for R&D, whereas Bhutan's whole GDP is only about $3 billion. So one is definitely access to compute resources. That is a big constraint for small nations. The secondly, you would say that every time there has been a technological disruption, small nations or the developing nations have always had to play a catch-up game. That might have been okay with the other technologies, but when it comes to AI, I think it is different. It is a technology that have the potential to have an agency of its own. So it's a different ball game, and I think we have to look at it differently. And thirdly, we have to look at what kind of philosophy or the values go into developing these AI tools. I saw a saying that software was eating the world, and someone said AI is eating software. Then recently there is an article that says philosophy is eating AI, but whose philosophy is it? So this is a big question. Whether the voices from the small nations, underrepresented communities get incorporated into the development of AI tools. I think it's a big question. Lastly, I would like to applaud the leadership that India has played in organizing the AI Impact Summit recently. And if you look at the the declaration that came out of the AI summit, it is very encouraging. So especially in terms of democratizing AI resources. I feel that this is a positive development, and we feel that India should play more leadership role in this aspect and be the voice or be the leader of the Global South. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I love that provocative question you posed, whose philosophy will ultimately be dominating how we shape AI. And maybe there can be many, right, that can be brought together. And I would love to bring Meredith into the conversation now, who I know is also very committed to addressing the question of how AI can actually be used to make us as humans better. So I would love to hear your perspective from cybersecurity, from the investment, geopolitical side. What trends are you witnessing, and how can we shape this technology in a way that is more inclusive and equitable?
Thank you, Paula. So I'm Meredith Walker. I'm a global economist, and I'm very honored to be here today representing the Cyber Future Foundation. Our co-chairs are General David Petraeus and Valmiki Mukherjee, who is in the front row here, who is our founder. We have a 10-year-old organization now, and I think the name speaks for itself, Cyber Future Foundation. We've been building a global network of practitioners who can come together to solve problems for humanity. So we are tracking very closely all the negativities and all the problems that AI can be causing, but we are also working toward solutions. And thinking today on the word of samskara and identity. As the lone American on this stage here, it's so humbling in a civilization thousands of years old, and we're celebrating our 250th birthday this year, and everyone is very excited. But one of the points of our 250th birthday in America that I think relates to everyone in this room, our First Amendment is about freedom of religion and freedom of conscience. And that is what makes us fundamentally human at our core, to be able to choose what we ourselves believe, who we ourselves want to associate with, and what types of beauty we want to create in this world and in this life. So that is my hope for AI. I've been reading this week, the founder of LinkedIn has a very interesting point about AI no longer as a tool, but perhaps as actually a material to be building. If you use the metaphor back to building, earlier in humanity, the tallest buildings we could build were 5, 6 stories. Then steel comes along and we can build skyscrapers. So I thought that's very interesting to think of AI not only as a tool, but maybe also as a material that could be fundamental for how we create moving forward. So that makes this particular point in time all the more important when we think about what types of values we want to bring. Are agents going to be able to do the terrible things as Rajesh was just describing? Will technology take young people away from their beautiful countries like in Bhutan, or will it help them go back home, as Sige has written, where the young people went away to college, they learned some good things on technology, and now they've gone back to a very remote village and are creating new farming, new methods. So that is my hope, and that is why I'm so honored to be here today at the Racina Dialogue. Because yes, it is a very dangerous, treacherous time for humanity, but I do still see a pathway of possibility of hope.
Thank you. And I'm actually grateful and surprised in a way how positive and hopeful the tone of this panel has been so far, and I think that's ultimately the tone we want to be setting. But obviously, the history of AI and sort of computing technologies more generally has not necessarily always been a very inclusive one, right? It's been quite lopsided in terms of where the innovation comes from, how the technology is shaped, with what kind of data is trained, and whose voices are heard in that as well. And here I would love to bring you in, Smriti, because you've obviously been driving a lot of the conversation in your role at the Ministry of Women and Child Development, amongst others, for how to ensure that not only one voice, so to speak, is heard in this field. So I would love to bring in your perspective.
I think the discussion, namaskar to everybody in the audience, this morning began with a panelist talking about an AI agent who proclaimed, "I am." Those two words, if you look at it from an Indian civilizational lens, were always a manifestation of the self. The fact that today AI has developed to a stature where an AI agent proclaims to be the self and have maybe a digital conscience should give you a statement for reflection. Meredith speaks about the cyber future, but let's talk about the present as we know it. Where does the power not only of investment but also implementation lie today? If you look at it geopolitically from the lens of AI, it lies with those who own enterprise software, who can implement enterprise software for issues of security, and not many then speak about how to implement AI tools for larger usage of humanity. Let me give you a very small example from a gender perspective. Today we know that there is a lack of investment in health on issues which particularly impact women. Only 1% of all global health investments are directed towards issues of illness and women. As a result of that, today if you put this one statement into an AI tool, you will recognize that cancer diagnosis for women is 2.5 years later as compared to men. Diagnosis of diabetes is 4.5 years later for women as compared to men. 50% women get a delayed response in terms of diagnosis after they suffer from a heart attack. Now, these numbers are telling, and these are the numbers espoused through AI tools. The issue is, while a lot of investment flows to AI and geopolitical security, how much, knowing that a gap exists, flows to issues not of inclusivity, but genuine issues of health and economics. And why am I tying the issue of inclusion with economics? Because every time inclusion gets spoken of from the perspective of advocacy, humanity, you will find less and less takers for it. When you equate the issue of inclusion and show a consequent impact on economics of a country, many will start getting up and taking note. So if you invest and fill the gender gap of even globally on this one particular issue of women's health, globally, McKinsey says that you will have an added value of 1 trillion to the economy. The question is, we know the gap exists. We know the AI tools available to bridge the gap. We know that nations at large understand the economic negative impact of such a gap. Why aren't we bridging the gap?
It's a great question. I love how you emphasize, and rightly so, that inclusion, be it for gender or smaller, bigger nations as well, across different subsets of the population, it's not just important for those communities themselves, but actually for countries and communities writ large. And nowadays, obviously, we're having a lot of conversations, including at Raisina, about security. But security is not just about defense, right? It's about making our economies, our citizens more resilient against the manifold challenges that we will witness going forward, be it at the geopolitical level, but also in terms of how we protect our environment and how we make sure that technologies are accessible to all. Which is also the point at which I would actually want to sort of move to the solution space, right? Given the sort of like challenges that we still face in making access to technologies more equitable and also upskilling the population, how can we basically make sure that we make progress on this front? What are some concrete solutions that you would propose, and maybe in a very targeted fashion, right, so we can make progress on some end? And maybe I will start with you here, Cheling Sigai, from your experience actually doing this on the ground.
I will build on from where I left off earlier. So, as I mentioned, it is really difficult for the small nations and small, underrepresented communities to have access to compute resources. So, I think the concept of a global compute commons, where small nations and those who cannot afford access to expensive hardware can have access to a shared AI infrastructure, which comes under the concept of global compute commons, I think would be the right way to go forward. So, even the developed countries should come together in facilitating, building such an infrastructure where the small states can also plug into that infrastructure and do the training of the models for their need. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think you brought up an additional important point, right, that is underlying a lot of these conversations, but I think is not yet discussed as prominently as it should be, namely the environmental cost of AI infrastructure as well, and how we can make sure that we make technologies more energy efficient as well. And I believe, Rajesh, you have a lot of experience there as well, if you can bring in your manifold experience here, and also what can be done at the technical level to improve the status quo.
This forum probably is not the right place for me to solve all the problems, but I could address just a few of them which relate to AI infrastructure. It was the case for a long time when technology was not so much embedded into human things that it actually acted as a leveler. So for example, you drove a car, the car did not distinguish whether it was a man or a woman driving it as long as the accelerator was pressed. But as technology became more and more involved and started having agencies, we now have structural, infrastructural issues which actually go into how humans interact with each other. And I sort of referred to that when he said now when you have agencies, you have rules and laws, and those rules and laws are no longer just rules of physics or the rules of chemistry, but they are actually rules that we live by. So when we talk about infrastructure, clearly public infrastructure is a big thing. The roads that we get onto it does not distinguish how rich you are in order to get you from point A to point B. And on that count, I think more than any country I know, definitely more than US, India has done a phenomenal job in what they call digital public infrastructure. And that is already beginning to show its impact. But when we look at this infrastructure, and it's evolving, it's not enough to just provide the pipes for bits and bytes or even programs that run in, but actually create some kind of accountability and trustworthiness which are rooted in our values. And imagine you come into a room in which there are a number of people who are talking to each other. Maybe you go to a doctor's office, they're talking in language that you don't understand. They're deciding how much treatment you will get or how much income you will make without you actually being part of that decision. But that's the world we are going into with AI, where your agents could be talking a language, they in fact already do, that you cannot follow. So now then the question comes up is what principles would you actually incorporate? And I think on that count, I would say accessibility is important. Pervasive accessibility. In other words, we must build into the architecture the notion of accessibility that is differentiated from economic value. And just to give you an example, there are 7 degree programs we have created in the School of AI that I lead, School of Data Science. And one of the requirement for graduation, we call GRR requirement for every thesis that is written. So about 80 or 90 PhD students, they have to address how their work addresses generalizability, reproducibility, and responsibility. And responsibility means, should it even be implemented? I know it is implementable, but that's a question that engineers don't ask. But we must ask that. So I think the infrastructure has to be responsive. And that's a totally new world we are entering into.
Thank you for that. And I think, as you mentioned as well, right, it's important that to be aware of the fact that technology will always represent certain values, but it's important to make those values explicit, right? So we can also intervene potentially if we need to course correct.
Yeah, we are in I think this is a kind of a bad analogy, but I'm going to give it anyway. We are in the bomb making era. In other words, we discovered the nuclear energy, and the first use is actually making the bomb. And, and AI is right now in that phase where is destructive usage, and destructive need not be in defense, it could even be in war, are much, much more obvious and much, much more apparent and much, much more immediate. I know there is a world beyond that world that will be a lot more, I would say, utopian, but we got to make an attempt.
And maybe, Smriti, if I could bring you back into the conversation here. As a policymaker, how do you grapple with such a rapidly developing environment, and how can you ensure essentially that certain communities are represented in the work that you push ahead? Essentially, perhaps what can other countries also learn from the approach that India has taken with regards to sort of ensuring a more equitable approach to AI from the beginning, as opposed to perhaps some more lopsided approaches in other countries?
I think as a nation which speaks 19,000 dialects, the opportunity lies in ensuring that technology is available in a local language so that usage can be quadrupled. While it is also an opportunity, there is an inherent challenge given that AI has democratized opportunities. However, there is a lot of inherent knowledge that gets lost between the translations that ensue. What is, and I've heard the two esteemed panelists, what is a moment for me to reflect on is that there isn't a lack of tools and opportunity through AI systems to not reach a state of utopia, because anybody who lives in a geopolitical reality we are living in right now does not presume that they shall be in the near future any sense of utopia. But if I defer to my conversation, let's say on health, today there is an availability of AlphaFold in India, where close to 180,000 researchers are looking at 200 protein structures which are available, courtesy AlphaFold. And they do not need an infrastructural lab facility to look at their research product in a physical form. They can utilize that AI tool and connect with the global scientific community on those issues of not only research with regards to medical health, but also at the intersection of both biology and technology. But when you do a prognosis of how many people are using AlphaFold vis-a-vis how many people are using ChatGPT, the numbers then suddenly change. ChatGPT is used by over 100 million people right here in India. And if you then delve into what are they using it for, 65% of marketing and HR professionals are using it for emails, for PPTs. 64% of media personnel are using it to compress research and to write articles. And look at the use of AI for scientific discovery, and look at the use for making PPTs. So I don't think on many levels we can fault AI for not using it more productively. I think what AI has possibly done is democratize the use of available resources. What AI has ensured is let humanity know that you can actually use the same tools for better and more productive ends. The responsibility is incumbent upon us as to how we then use this entire global ecosystem. Do we use it to generate kill lists, or do we use it to generate more and more research? And do we live between those two realities by balancing, I think, needs of population at scale and needs of politics, which is fundamental to many cohorts across the world?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think I really enjoyed 2 points in particular that you made, like right in the beginning, about the importance of AI being able to tailor towards local communities as well. I think the language aspect is a fascinating one, because a lot of the sort of like very dominant players have originally trained their models with English solely, right? And then now I think we're seeing trends across the board really of so-called small language models as well, right? That are trained in local languages, tailored towards specific industries. In Germany, for instance, where I'm from, we have a long tradition of family companies, companies that have, been producing certain engineering marvels for centuries, right? And there to sort of like capture all this physical knowledge, translate that into data, and then basically leverage AI to make better use of that knowledge. I think these are some trends that we'll be witnessing going forward. But then I think there was an additional aspect to what you said, Smriti, with regards to setting the right incentives. And I think here both governments and private actors have a role to play. And here I would love to forward Meredith back into the conversation. Cyber Future Foundation, as Smriti mentioned, we obviously have to obviously set certain guardrails now and make certain investments. Do you have any concrete examples of the kind of investments, opportunities that are being created today that lead us in the right direction?
Oh, thank you for that question. Yes, indeed, we do. I want to turn back to the word utopia that we mentioned up here. Utopia, dystopia. A friend of mine calls what we could work toward, very poetically, he says, the more beautiful world our hearts tell us is possible. And I do believe that is something we can rightly work toward, even today in the darkness of these days. Work toward the beauty. And sometimes I'm thinking about, up here, we're talking about artificial intelligence. I've never liked the word artificial exactly. It doesn't feel right. But being in India, being in Delhi, being here for the holy, beautiful holiday with all the color and love and spring in the air, I thought, maybe it's artisanal intelligence we should really be looking for. You know, as artisans, what can we create, for human health, for all the good things. So what are we doing specifically at the Cyber Future Foundation? As I've mentioned, we are very aware of the dark times and difficulties and sufferings people go through. We have, number one, it's called Project Indigo, where we bring cybersecurity professionals together to help humanitarian organization and in conflict areas. So very important project. And you can just imagine cybersecurity involving certain NGOs that are going into dangerous places, the type of protections that they need. Secondly, we're working on, at the enterprise level, a cyber board book. So boards of directors for companies and enterprises have a better understanding of cybersecurity, and now AI as well. That also goes back to a point on trust. We are also working for a Project Gateway. How are we going to train people in cybersecurity and AI? We haven't even talked on this panel yet really about the job displacement. You know, thousands upon thousands of professionals all of a sudden losing their jobs. What are they going to do? How will we bring them back in to the workforce? But finally, and I would say most importantly, is our initiative, RSAFE, which stands for Responsible, Secure AI Future. So as part of that, we are holding dialogues with different professionals to kind of set up the laws, regulations, ethics, values that we want to be sure are incorporated. And most importantly, I can announce today that we are setting up a global AI certification program. We're intending to train 100,000 people on AI, but most importantly, bringing them together to talk about the values, guardrails that are going to be needed. So that is starting today with Cyber Future Foundation.
It's very exciting. Please.
So I think Smriti touched upon something very interesting, and I think you amplified that. Why there are more people using ChatGPT for other things and then not so many for AlphaFold, for example. And that, in fact, lies the crux of things. Some usage of new technologies do not require a whole lot of context, and definitely not an ecosystem. But if you're going to do a drug discovery, there's a whole ecosystem of validation. There's a whole ecosystem of even wet lab work that needs to be accompanied. You may not be doing it, but somebody next to you will be doing that. And that's where the drug discovery comes in. In fact, in between drug discovery and ChatGPT usage is healthcare delivery. Again, many opportunities, but the ecosystem that is needed to actually make this useful and actually realize the potential of the technology, that is now a part of public infrastructure. That is a part of public service that needs to be actually actively led. And that cannot be done by individuals. So which is why you end up seeing a lot more common usage of these technologies and not so uncommon.
Perfectly fair point. And in the spirit of inclusivity, I would actually love to bring in the audience now as well. I think it's one of the great pleasures of this conference that we have so many diverse voices here as well. And I see there's a lady over here. Perhaps we have a microphone.
I understand that AI is accumulated digital knowledge. But what if all that accumulated digital knowledge is Western?
May I?
Please.
So I think that, ma'am, it's actually a manifestation exactly of the statement I made right now, that in a country of 19,000 dialects, we are cognizant of the fact that we have 425 languages that are rare, or for that matter, right now are not used in everyday practice. So what is the wealth of knowledge that was lost in the 425 languages that are right now not practiced? And that wealth of knowledge may also include what are the traditional medicine systems that may have existed in those 425 languages. Similarly, if I juxtaposition it with the 19,000 dialects I'm presuming you're an Indian, but as a fellow Indian, we know that there are many agricultural practices which are localized, but which may not find a reference, let's say, to any AI systems. For that matter, point in case, let me give you one example of Ayush product called Rakshavalya, which has been implemented in the state of Karnataka amongst children just to test as to what is the impact of anemia with children who ingest that particular Ayush intervention as compared to children who ingest allopathic medicines. Anemia in the children who ingest Ayurveda went down by 1% and did not come back post discontinuation. It is currently under study by ICMR, the Indian Council for Medical Research. But if you type into any AI systems, I don't think any would throw up that one experiment that is currently underway in the most prestigious medical institution in our country. So yes, a lot of what AI today builds in terms of data sets is after scraping the internet. A lot of that gets built over and above it is synthetic data, and not only a bias with regards to, let's say, women's health, but even biases which are of linguistic variety. We have seen it in the study of anthropology. We may see that in AI as well. So your point is well taken.
Yeah, exactly. And also with regards to what
And
can
may I
actually
add
be-
another context, ma'am? We are speaking as Indians. 1/4 of the world, which is in Africa today, is not connected to the internet. So imagine the scope of data that has gone missing from that part of the world.
Let me just add something to here. This is really important. It is true that AI, at least foundation models today, have a lot of Western knowledge. But AI is more than just a database of knowledge. It is actually the ability to learn new things, including old things. It's the ability to generalize. And we are still in the early phases of that technology. That learnability, especially when it comes to smaller models and so on, will find its way to incorporate all the word knowledge over time. But yes, the origins that currently we have, but it's not static. And the ability to learn is what is the crux of AI today.
I think, Paula, just adding one thing to the mix of what Rajesh said. I think dichotomy is that an MIT recent study says that cognitive skills decline by 55% when people depend on AI to learn.
Yeah, and I mean, I think
So that's why I said the most, I think, famous words should be, which resonate post this, is find the balance.
right, and also make sure that there's a baseline of knowledge and education that we continue to convey before people use these tools, so they can also critically evaluate them. I think like media literacy is becoming more and more important in this regard as well, because inevitably the answers that you pose to an AI system are only going to be as good as the questions, right? And sometimes you have to basically critically follow up. I like to generally conceptualize AI systems like interns in a way, right? In the beginning, they're new to the organization, right? They might not know you, they might not know the organization that well. You have to engage in a continuous conversation so they better understand you as well, and also can sort of like support you in a way that's actually valuable and target-oriented. But I see there are many more questions. Please do, if you could line up at the microphones, I think that might be best. I think there's a lady here in the back, if you want to move to the, yes, please. And feel free to just form a line at the microphones, that might be easiest.
Yes.
Thank you.
Lucia De Luca, CEO of Ahead. Thanks for the fascinating discussion. I have a question though. You spoke about inserting more data, more languages, making it like more democratic and varied. But if most of the work on AI is done by private companies, how can they be recipient of this message? Is this governance? I mean, it's the regulations like we do in Europe, or what is the best way to make this happen?
I think companies need to compute the productive byproduct in terms of economics for such an inclusive drive, especially with regards to regions, religions, communities, and languages. Till such time you don't make a profit case for companies, you will not see them embrace this reality.
So setting the right incentives, basically. Meredith or CJ, did you want to add something to that?
Well, yes, I would also agree with that. I would say in the US, we're very big on public-private partnerships. The government responds well to private sector-led initiatives, but also responds well to citizen and NGO-led initiatives. So I would say people working together, coming together in forums like Ricina and others, and then going back to respective governments for policy is effective.
I think there's a gentleman over there. I'm just going to move to the other side of the room.
Okay, good morning everyone. I'm Dr. Pulkajan and I teach filmmaking and advertising. So I have a question. How can storytelling help reduce fear and bias around AI and build more hopeful narratives about tech? Because we are seeing a lot of movies talking about AI in a negative bias, whether it is Megan or we have Hindi movies like Log Out and Control. So yeah, how storytelling can help reduce that bias?
Honestly, I love storytelling. As an economist, I always like to talk about statistics, but very much stories. I mean, that's fundamentally how we learn as humans over millennia, right? And it is a problem that the stories are very, very scary. I don't know, when I was working with the X Prize Foundation to counter that, actually, we got together a group of science fiction writers, I mean, yes, who were aware of the dangers, but could also talk to the positive futures. I had a very good friend also at X Prize who, we were talking about the Star Trek TV show and the movies, and if any of you have seen that, you know, it was about a futuristic society where all races lived and worked together in harmony, and you know, there was still war in the universe, but people could come together. And he said the problem with that was Star Trek didn't show us how we got there, right? So we do need the stories. I think some of the ones that my fellow panelists have shared, the positive examples of people coming together and doing the good things will work wonders.
And maybe what we can do now, I see there's a lot of interest in the audience. Maybe we'll take a couple more questions, and then we can like fold those answers into a closing one. So there's a gentleman over here, I think that's been...
Hello, am I audible? Yeah. So thank you for taking my question. So my question is that as the panel mentioned about agency of its own, right? Agentic AI. So if the hallmark of an AI agent is ability to perceive and act autonomously, are we essentially moving from model biased to behavior biased when these agents are trained on historical data that is inherently exclusionary, and how do we prevent the agents from optimizing for prejudice in real time? Is the solution a technical unlearning of historical data, or do we need a separate moral guardrail agent that oversees all these primary ones that are available right now?
Okay, we'll hold that for a second. I'm just going to collect a couple of questions. So this is about agents and if they're going to make this question of exclusion worse. I'm going to turn to this side of the room and take 2 or 3 more questions.
Good morning. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. So my question is to Smriti ma'am. Ma'am, how can AI help reduce the gender gap in India in terms of one of the most important policy that can actually overcome the gender gap in India?
Thank you. So we have AI agents, gender gap. We'll take one more on this side as well, please.
So I have like a line of questions which are sort of intertwined. Basically, like I feel like a lot of concerns regarding to AI, like legal concerns specifically, were not discussed in today's conversation because AI has a transboundary nature in itself. We are using ChatGPT in India, but it is like not an Indian AI product. So there are a lot of AI products that are being used around globally. So then, you know, there were certain cases where AI had, like specifically ChatGPT had advised people to do certain things. And it had also at times people who were mentally like going through some issues. AI had actually encouraged them to go and self-harm as well. So there's a lot of accountability issue when it comes to AI, but then there's also a legal transboundary nature where we don't know where would be the jurisdiction for such a case, and who would be liable again. It's a company which has made an AI product. The AI is semi-autonomous in a way. So who will be liable? Would it be the company, or would the company just be like, oh, this is like, not something that we reasonably expected to happen? And that is like a excuse used in a lot of cases by companies. As well as when there was a conversation about having a global compute resources and funds. So if, let's say, we are developing a globe, like a lot of countries are coming together to develop a particular AI system.
You may have to keep it short. Sorry.
I'm so sorry. So if there's like something like that, then again it becomes a question of it would be owned by multiple countries since they have worked together to develop it. Then again, who's liable if it leads to some kind of activity which is illegal in nature? And same as with the autonomous weapons as well, because AI and FRT technology is used with a lot of drone autonomous weapons, which have in past in certain situations attacked people who did not even have a gun in their hand.
Yeah.
So again, it's like a very huge question of accountability with AI, like legal accountability specifically.
Yeah, both within the technology and across boundaries. Wow, just some small minor questions to address in the end. Maybe we'll start with you, Sige. Any of these you want to weigh in? Agentic AI, gender, legal and accountability issues.
Right. I would like to just focus on one thing. I'll leave the rest to my fellow panelists. So I like the question about the private sector involvement and whether they would look at the common good. I think that's a very big question. So that's where I think the balance and the guardrails, the balance regulation comes in. So I'd like to leave there in the interest of time.
Thank you. Yeah, very brief.
So I'm looking at the, we have 30, 40 seconds. Let me just say one thing quickly. And that has to do with the fact that all these machines are trained on biased data and therefore they practice bias. That's a very naive way of looking at it. In fact, all of us are living through our experiences, which are inherently subset of everybody else's, but we are capable of rising above it. So this behavioral determinism that is often applied to AI agents does not actually apply anymore to humans or to the thing. But I want to stop before you get to anyone.
To be continued in the coffee break. But please, Meredith.
It says time's up, but we might have 20 seconds each, I think. So I'm thinking back on risk and responsibility. Our whole modern economy is based on the ability to price risk, and when things go wrong, with insurance companies or whatever, determine who is responsible, and then that party pays. I do think AI raises incredibly important questions about that. Who is going to be accountable? And it does need to be a human that can make a payment.
So model bias does exist. It has been evidenced through research, and anybody who says no is actually a bit foolhardy. The idea is, again, finding the balance between those who look at the world of research, synthetic data, real data, and data which is currently missing, and see which model has what gap, and see whether those companies are allocating enough resources to study the gap, and then go on to then bridging the gap digitally and finding an economics for it. Insofar as how can AI help the issues of women in India today, you know that one of the most ambitious health plans in the world is the Ayushman Bharat Yojana. Given the analytics which is available today for governance, even in Ayushman Bharat, we can estimate where women go missing from utilizing that resource, irrespective of a physical hospital or medical center available, and physical availability of healthcare workers. That in itself is good enough for a district administration and the chief medical office in the district administration to red flag as to what types of diseases have women go missing from utilizing those resources. Secondly, women in crime. Today, there is enough available data with the government at the center and in the state to highlight what are the hotspots of crime against women and then increase police patrolling and other interventions with regard to law and order. So those are the two examples. Insofar as the young lady asking us about the legal challenges with regards to use of AI and who is responsible. If there is an enterprise software holder on which an application is built, there is a legal presumption that the responsibility lies with the application owner, which being the company. If the application is invested in a host country and implemented, let's say, in our country, then the jurisdiction is split. However, the liability gets diluted the minute you as a consumer hit the I agree button.
Wow, that's something for us to continue reflecting about. And I think if this panel has shown anything, it's what an exciting field this is, how many opportunities there are here. And I do encourage everybody in the audience to continue these conversations with each other, but also with our panelists, whom I am grateful to for covering such a broad field with such perseverance and also insight. So thank you very much for your contributions, and thank you all for joining us.